Oh,
Yes, ma'am. So we are live now. And good evening, everyone. I am Shruti Chatterjee, and I welcome you all to this panel discussion on cultural identity and ideology, curated under TMYS review in association with Center of South Asian Studies, University of Hawaii. Under this theme, TMY's review March 2023 will explore the role of community appearance and individual presentation in shaping cultural identity and ideology. I would also like to state that we are calling for submissions of stories, essays, and poems. And for project architecture and submission guidelines, please visit our website www.tellmeyourstory.biz. Today's topic of discussion is multiculturalism in clothing styles, jewelry, and vice versa. And we are honored to have Professor and Toolika Gupta and Dr. Parul Bhatnagar and Dr. Angela Jansen as our esteemed speaker for this panel discussion. Thank you so much for joining us, ma'am. I shall now quickly introduce our speakers. Our first speaker for tonight is Dr. Parul Bhatnagar. Dr. Parul Bhatnagar, Professor Emeritus, she has a rich experience of 34 years. She has been advisor to Hastashilpa Vikas Nigam, Government of Madhya Pradesh. She has studied the system traditions and lifestyle of the people of India and has knowledge and grasp of the multifarious diversity, bringing inspiration from different cultures, which became an aspiration for research on an artistic evolution of traditional textiles of India. Thank you so much for joining us, ma'am. Next, we have Dr. Toolika Gupta. Dr. Toolika Gupta is the director of Indian Institute of Crafts and Design, Jaipur. She is a fashion and textile historian and has presented papers in many national and international conferences. She is a founding member and the secretary of Textile and Clothing Research in Center, New Delhi. Her research interests include fashion and textile history, revival of Indian handicrafts and culture, craft cluster initiatives, and craft business incubation. She is the board of studies of many design institutes and a member of CII National Committee for Design and Dean Design Skills of Rajasthan ILD Skills University. Thank you so much for joining us, ma'am. And next we have Dr. Maria Angela Jensen. Dr. Angela Jansen is a decolonial researcher, educator, consultant, curator, and director of the Research Collective for Decoloniality and Fashion. She is co editor of Modern Fashion Traditions, Negotiating Traditions and Modernity Through Fashion. She is also a guest editor of the special issue of Fashion Theory in Decoloniality and Fashion. Thank you so much for joining us today. Now, without further delay, we shall start with our today's session. First, I'd like to request Dr. Toolika Gupta to present your views on today's topic. And I would also like to request to please keep your mics on mute while one is speaking. And over to you, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shruti. Thank you for inviting me here. I look forward to meeting all the stalwarts and listening to them. So, the topic of multiculturalism in clothing and jewelry that you've chosen for today, uh, I think exists all around us. And especially if you look at the way we talk about decolonization today, we are trying to understand more about our roots. People are trying across the world. And today, plurality is something that is worshipped. Nobody just wants to focus only on a type of clothing. Of course, we've had a huge Western influence in our way of dressing, but still, there's a lot of nuances based on region, religion, or geography, history of a particular place that influence the clothing. And today, if you look at India, uh, a lot has come in from the West. First, it was Britain. Now it is America that has pervaded, the clothing scene, the brands, etc. But still, a huge country like India has its own strengths, its own dictates, even in terms of color. So many a times when people talk about fashion forecasts and things like that, it may not always work in India because the huge amount of population that lives not in metros but in different parts of the country is very open to experimenting and wants to dress up the way they want to dress up. So there is multiculturalism, I would say, all around us, and it's worth praising. It's worth taking it forward. In terms of jewelry, I'd say there's a lot because we see a lot of changes happening. The kind of jewelry that women used to wear, say about 50 years earlier, they do not sport that kind of jewelry anymore because people are now they have come out of the houses to start working. So the amount of adornment in terms of jewelry has reduced, and also styles of jewelry have changed. um, so where we pick up the thread, where we talk about from, we can talk about specifics of different kinds of jewelry that exists. And I think the beauty in India largely is in women's wear. Of course, there's a variety of men's wear, and I stay in Rajasthan and I can see and share the kind of clothes that people wear. And in fact, clothes are usually white, but the headgear, you have about 27, 28 types of headgear. And if you go deep into rural Rajasthan, into Barmer, into Jaisalmer, you see that really alive even today. But yes, slowly it's being changed even there to jeans and shirts and t shirts, something which is commonly available, uh, lower priced, uh, easy to get. So this is impacting multiculturalism, I must say. But still, it is quite alive. Yeah.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for this engaging presentation. Next, I would like to request Dr. Parul Bhatnagar, ma'am, to share her views on today's topic. Over to you, ma'am. Ma'am, you are on mute.
Is it okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Shruti, for inviting me. And it's a pleasure to hear the beautiful ideas which Toolika had to give us. And I'm waiting anxiously to hear another stalwart here. We all know that fashion or textiles is all cyclic. Costumes and textiles have occupied a prominent place in the world across geographic regions and climatic conditions since ancient times. People naturally utilized whatever material was conveniently available. Over time, the designing of textiles and costumes developed in the hands of artisans as they enriched fabric and garments. In fact, contemporary textiles and costume reflect our spirit, our consciousness, and the vibrancy of the society in which we live. This is how textiles and costume designing have evolved in India. Artisans and craftsmen have played a pivotal role in textile designing since prehistoric time. The vision vocabulary of artisans and functional usage of artifacts have led to the important contribution in the development of artistic designs. The division of techniques, however, was not clear cut, and quite often one technique could flow into the other, leading to the variation in characteristics, forms, and styles. The preservation and revival and study of the best of textiles and costumes are necessary to provide a guide to good craftsmanship. Fashion designers and craftsmen today create crafts which design the ornamental motifs are truly characteristic of India. And these have been the inspiration for future generations. The dates when specific pattern in textiles and costume appear and reappear are illuminating, for they reveal how designs and styles repeat themselves. Often a pattern seems typical of a far later time than that of the actual making. All fashions arise at a particular moment in history. People demonstrate where they are in place and time by shaping the lines and colors of their clothes and furnishings in their homes. A fresh modification of old motifs and styles ornament the design in general, how innovation is accepted and designing. Like I told you in the beginning, it is all cyclic. What is there today is not there tomorrow. And what there's going to be tomorrow is not there today. Textiles and costumes go back to the mankind's earliest times and belong to a very old tradition of designing and symbols. Although reinvented several times, the basic art forms retain their shape and artistic appeal through the centuries. Like other art forms, traditional textiles and costumes also link the past with the present, though through the centuries. The skill of an artisan has been employed for design creation or modification, not for documentation. The documentation has been left for the museums, design centers, and archives. The changing role of artisans, craftsmen, and designers are emphasized in the context of emerging technologies that can facilitate the preservation, dissemination, and generating of new design based on decorative forms, and also offers enhanced capabilities in terms of color, variety, and color differentiations. It is hoped that influence of emerging technologies will lead to a massive renaissance in the field of decorative designing. Indian textiles and costumes designs are used today by interchanging motifs and their ornamentation for serving the world of fashion and increasing awareness about our rich Indian cultural heritage. And this is exactly what the foreigners today are falling on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for this informative presentation. Next, I would like to request Dr. Angela Jansen to present her views on today's topic. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you so very much for these very, very rich introductions. I mean, as the own non-Indian speaker on this panel, I kind of would like to acknowledge my positionality and where I am speaking from. When I was invited to contribute to the panel, I was very much intrigued by the topic of Tell Me Your Story. So that's why, if you would allow me, I would like to tell a little story of my personal story of how I got to this topic, and hopefully maybe how I can contribute to this panel. So first of all, I'm speaking from the Belgian countryside, which is a very small country in Europe, and where I was born and raised from a mixed family background, if you like. I have a Jewish Moroccan mother, I have a Protestant Dutch father, and I have a Catholic American grandfather. So I was raised in 3 languages. And today I am married to a Muslim Moroccan man. So from a very young age, I was very intrigued by cultural identities and how we get those or how we appropriate those. So I decided to study cultural anthropology. By a sheer interest of and respect for cultural diversity, but it turned out that anthropology is a very colonial discipline. And I came to discover that during my master's, when I was doing research in Indonesia, because I studied in the Netherlands, and due to its colonial history, it made sense, or at least to the university, that I would do research on traditional dress in Indonesia. And as a means of preparation, I was directed to museum collections and museum catalogs. But of course, once I arrived in Indonesia, in the village where I was going to do research, it was a complete shock, because I was preparing with information that was at least 100 years old. And what I was finding in the village was not the same, of course. Actually, what I had learned in the books and the collections was in museum collections. All that to say that I became brutally aware of the bias of both my education and the museum collections and the discourse around it. So moving on into my PhD and doing research on fashion in Morocco, I realized that it was all over, that it was not just particular to Indonesia and the cultural and the colonial heritage of the Netherlands. And so that's how I came to focus basically 20 years of research on what it is that we call traditional dress and how it is related to what we call modern fashion, and how for the last 20 years I've been trying to bridge or at least disrupt that gap, because in fact it's a political gap. And so moving forward, I was living and working in Morocco. And so I got an opportunity to put on a academic conference. And I decided to do it on so-called non-Western fashion. And that is now 10 years ago. And that has become the collective, as you were mentioning so kindly in your introduction, the collective on decoloniality and fashion. And why would I like to share this with you is because the main aim of the collective is the decentralizing of what has become a dominant discourse on what fashion is, and most specifically on what fashion is not. And so I think, or I hope, the way I can maybe contribute to this conversation as an outsider, as speaking from the dominant West, not even as a fashion scholar, but in heart as an anthropologist, is how we can start creating space, how we can, first of all, start humbling and silencing this dominant conversation on what we have come to know as Western fashion or modern fashion, and how we can start creating space for an incredibly rich diversity of fashioning systems all around the world. And you may notice that I'm using fashioning as a verb rather than as fashion as a noun, because that allows a dynamic, that allows a fashioning of the body outside of the noun that has come to represent a dominant fashion system, a capitalist system that is based on discrimination and exclusion, and that is actually defining itself based on what fashion is not. And that is usually what we consider the periphery, the global south, the non-West. So hopefully, again, that's where I can maybe come in as into how can we recreate, because it used to be the fact that we had a pluriverse of fashion systems that had their own stories, that had their own trajectory outside even the dominant West. But we all know through globalization how the dominant Western fashion system has found or taken or claimed root in all the other parts of the world. So again, hopefully I can speak from that positionality and the experience that, so the collective is a worldwide network of coalitions who speak for themselves, who are self-activated and self-representing. And so in having that conversation and having those dialogues with all these coalitions who represent themselves, we can again start decentralizing the dominant and very violent Eurocentric fashion system and discourse.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It was very interesting to hear you speak, and thank you so much for sharing your story. And with this, we now move on to our question answer segment. And my first question is for Dr. Toolika, ma'am. And my question to you is Indian jewelry is an amalgamation of different cultural influences that have shaped the country over the years, an ornament with rich history related to many cultures around the globe. Could you shed some light on the significance of such ornaments, ma'am? Over to you.
Yeah, hi. Thank you, Shruti. But I couldn't really hear the last sentence properly. But I'll take it from here. I think there's some issue in the internet. First of all, I'd like to say it was very interesting to hear Angela speak about, the collective and uh, anthropology. And it is from here that I would like to share my interest that arose in finding out. My PhD ultimately I did from the University of Glasgow on influence of British rule on Indian fashion, elite Indian menswear, basically. And this question always intrigued me. I'm an Indian. I've been told this is your country. And here I am wearing skirts, talking in English, going to a convent school. So who am I? And till I get married, I am wearing skirts and trousers. And one fine day, I'm supposed to wear a sari. And so what is all of this? And where am I? And what is tradition? What is right? What is wrong? So that is what actually made me do this kind of research. Yeah, that was just to add to what Dr. Angela Jansen said just now. It was very fascinating to hear that. Okay, now I have the question here. Indian jewelry is an amalgamation of different cultural influences that have shaped the country over the years. An ornament with a rich history related to many cultures around the globe, Hath Phool, also known as Hath Kamal, is one of them. Yes. Indian jewelry, definitely, as you have said, it's very difficult to define actually something that is traditional, as we just say, because things keep evolving over time. And even in India, when you look at the significance or the material that is available in terms of sculpture, in terms of books written, by a few, there have not been many authors. Dr. Parul Bhatnagar has written one book. There has been a book by just ancient Indian textiles. So that book, so these books, when they look at sculpture and when they talk about the kind of jewelry that was worn, you do see, bracelets, you see armlets, but you don't really see the karn phool. You see rings, which are known as angulia. You also see neck jewelry, etc. But specifically, the Hath Kamal or the Hath Phool, this has a much later influence. It has come in with the Persian influence coming into India. And slowly, it has taken a huge significance as a very important part of jewelry during marriages. It is an ornament that all brides would love to possess. Depending on the income bracket that you belong to, it could be of gold and diamond, or maybe lesser gold mixed with other metal. It could also be silver coated with gold, with utilization of gemstones. And this particular Hath Phool is something like, you have multiple rings here, and then it connects, and then there's a bracelet here. So this is how it looks like. And slowly with time, we see that it has evolved from a very simple kind of design to a very complicated one, where it is even very heavy. And you see a lot of Ranis, Maharanis with that particular phool. In fact, Maharani Gayatri Devi, because I'm here in Jaipur, so I can share a lot of stories of Jaipur. And Maharani Gayatri Devi had a beautiful kind of a Hath Phool, and she has her photographs with that, emphasizing on her face and putting her hand here and something like that, because it became a symbol of delicacy of the fingers, of the hand, another way to possess wealth. Because if you look at the way Indian ornaments are, they were always a means of wealth for the woman. They were not merely for adornment. It was also like a fixed deposit. In case it's needed, it could be sold. And very interestingly, recently I was working on a book that is to be published by McGill Library in Canada. And it was about two sisters living in Madras from 1801 to 1810, the Gwilym sisters. And one of them writes, when they write to their mother, they send a lot of letters, and it's all about the letters that they have that, we've read and we're working on. So in that, it is very beautifully stated that She talks about a maid, she talks about others, that all the jewelry that they have, they wear on their person. So it's like, it's always there. Wherever they go, if they are in need, so the jewelry is always there on them. So I think this is how multiple styles of jewelry evolved. And Bollywood, or we should say Indian film industry, has really promoted a lot of jewelry. And today we see things being copied from what is seen on the screen by the actors or actresses wearing them, especially in weddings. So whenever they show Mughal weddings or Mughal scenes, they will always show these kind of ornaments. So they have again gained popularity. Uh, and It's very interesting. A friend of mine was doing her research on jewelry at NIFT in Delhi. And she also pointed out that the more elite the people are getting, they don't want to wear too much jewelry. But when you look at the social strata in India, which is a lower social strata, those people want to wear more jewelry to show their affluence. So yeah, these things are also there. I just thought I'll share that. But Hath Kamal slowly has come from the Persian times, and it has established itself. Is what I think from whatever I have seen and read. Thank you. I hope I wasn't too long. I just thought I'll share whatever I have to say. Thank you.
Hi, I'm sorry, Shruti, I think is facing some camera issue. So, internet issue. So, till the time she comes back, let me ask the next question that she has framed for Professor Parul Bhatnagar. And that question that she wanted to ask Dr. Bhatnagar is, uh, do you think multiculturalism in fashion has been able to promote ethnic inclusiveness in Indian urban society? So, what would you like to say about that, Professor Bhatnagar?
Absolutely, what you say is totally, when we talk about inclusiveness, we see that India is got, every state has a different kind of a design. But today, those designs are all merging together. Like we talk about, like she was talking about Kernpool, right? You were talking about. But here, when we talk about textiles or we talk about costumes, we see to it that we all know what is a fish. A fish is a matasya. And that is a typical thing of a kantha, which is from Bengal, correct? But today, if you look into, even if you go down south and you look into those South Indian saris, you are going to see it there. So when we are talking about the multicultural thing, what you're talking about, it is definitely there. We are looking into the fashion which is going from one place to the other, to one society to the other. Even the poor people, they would want to, the urban, like you're talking about the Indian urban societies, how are they going to be taking the inclusiveness? You'll be surprised that here where I come from, we have trained 1,500 people from socially challenged society. And can you imagine that those financially challenged people, they are making a lot of products, there are lot of designs they are making, and what they're doing, believe it or not, they are taking the traditional designs, they're trying to copy those traditional designs, and they're trying to innovate. We help those people to send those designs to London. They are being sold there. We also are trying to help, we are talking about the multiculturalism. This is exactly what has happened, because Europe mein ek style hai. There is one style in Europe. America has a different style. Australia has a different style. Like I told you in the beginning, that we have cyclic movement for a design. Here also, the designs move according to the different states. And when we look into the fashion, We, you see, first we used to have drain pipes. The drain pipes went into the huge bell bottoms and things, right? And then again they got back. So what is that? That is all cyclic. The same way, when we talk about the multiculturalism, the different states have different things. Like you have embroidered, painted, printed. Depending on the season a particular state is, the design is according to that. What is the availability of a particular state? In India, it's very, very diverse. Every state has a different type of culture. Every state, like if you have a design, if you have a style for Kashmir, which is on the northern side, you are going to see the people, the clothes they wear will be all embroidered. You're not going to find printed stuff. But if you go down to Rajasthan or you go down to Gujarat, you're going to see a lot of printed stuff there. Why? You're going to see that because here they don't have mulberry trees for the growth of the silks, or they don't have the woolen, they don't have the these lambs, and they don't have the pashmina goats and all for the wool to be to be read, so they cannot do the embroidery. So what they're doing printing. If you go down south, you are going to see these Kanjivaram stuff, the silks, because there's tons of mulberry there. Or if you go towards the northern eastern states, you're going to see it there. So when we are talking about, this is a huge topic to be discussed, and in this short time we cannot do justice to it. Thank you, Shruti. Any questions? I'm willing to answer, but this is too huge a question to be answered, at a
Thank you so much,
short
ma'am.
thing.
And I'm extremely sorry for my poor connection. And I'm really
Not
sorry.
at all, not at all. No, not at all. It is a pleasure.
Thank you, ma'am.
We were able to talk to somebody else also.
Yes, ma'am. And my next question is for Dr. Jansen. And my question to you is, ma'am, how do you think multiculturalism in fashion is breaking stereotypes? Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, and thank you so very much. I mean, I'm learning so much. As you know, I'm not specialized in fashion in India, and it probably takes me 3 lifetimes to even, get the slightest idea of the richness. But thank you also, Shruti, for your question, which I also think is a very complex question that may deserve its whole panel of its own. But maybe just to start off with 2 main concepts of the question, because first of all, multiculturalism is, especially where I come from here in Western Europe, it's a very buzz word, which is already almost out of fashion because it has been used so much. But I've always wondered what we mean exactly by it. And especially, I'm sure that I will interpret it very differently from my cultural context than from your cultural context. But usually I am considered multicultural because of, all the different roots of my parents. And I'm even like a 3rd generation. So you can imagine. But I guess for me, it has become my culture, right? Because that's all I know. I've, that mixture of, growing up in one country, with all those roots. So I also wonder, when we use the term multiculturalism, it's almost as if then cultures are very well defined and static. Because in order to have multi, you kind of like have to have different ones that kind of like then, come together. So as I see for myself that I have kind of like then, in a sense, made my new cultural identity, if you like, from the identities that I have inherited. I wonder, when we talk about multiculturalism, whenever cultures meet, they're, most likely going to blend and mix, and then for kind of like create new cultures. So I think that's one term that I'm kind of like grappling with. And the other one is stereotypes, which is very interesting. The coincidence is that I'm teaching a class on Monday on stereotypes. But when I talk about stereotypes with my students, we're talking, for example, about, would you be comfortable getting an open heart surgery by a doctor in a wheelchair? Because we have certain associations with people in a wheelchair. And although they maybe physically have constraints, that doesn't necessarily mean their brains are constrained. Would you feel comfortable leaving your child in the care of a man who's covered in tattoos? Because we associate tattooing with violence, criminality, you name it. Whereas in a lot of cultures, it is an expression of a cultural identity, of a heritage, of a long line of ancestors. And we can go on and on and on. Would you feel comfortable sitting next to a woman who is completely veiled in an airplane? No, because we associate it probably with terrorism. You know what I mean? So probably stereotypes, also if I hear the conversation within the Indian context, is very different, because India is such an incredibly big and rich country. You have stereotypes within your national borders. So here, talking from my positionality, we talk about stereotypes, in relation to gender, sexuality, ageism, even. So stereotypes, therefore, are very culturally also defined of where you're speaking from. Now, to try and answer your question, can multiculturalism break stereotypes? It's a very, very tricky one, because in order to become a stereotype, we already have a stereotypical idea of what a culture is. So if, let's say, we're talking about national or ethnic identities, when we think about Indian influences on European fashion, we're going to think in stereotypes, because we only got the stereotypical idea of the sari, and I can even mention the names. I probably can't get any further than sari. So just to give you an idea that we're already talking in stereotypes. So when we get this, what we call multicultural society, right, through immigration, through globalization, through colonial heritage, do they break stereotypes, or do they actually confirm stereotypes? I think in order to break stereotypes, we need much more than a multicultural society. Because usually multicultural societies means you have all these communities that live in their own bubble, if you like, with very, very little interaction. And in that sense, it only confirms stereotypes. If there would be a true and honest exchange between these communities, these diversity of communities, then who knows? Yes, in that sense, they could break stereotypes. So I guess bottom line is we need more to get in conversation with each other, to get to know each other, to break down stereotypes. Thank you.
But there is a ray of hope, ma'am. And thank you so much for your answer. And my next question too is to Dr. Toolika Gupta. And my question to you is balancing the image of exclusivity with the process of inclusiveness is one of the biggest cultural challenges facing the fashion industry. What do you think multiculturalism facing challenges when you talk about inclusivity? Over to you, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you, Shruti. You're posing some very interesting questions. And see, again, as both the other speakers have been saying, I will say that everybody has a way of looking at things, and it may be different from another person's way of looking at it. What I look at inclusivity now, and especially in your question right now, that how do you take inclusivity and exclusivity together? Let me put it like that. So in this, for me, inclusivity would be the different kinds of Indian textiles, Indian embroideries, a lot of people working in this area. So we include all of them, I mean, in one way. So that is there. But then uh, if we create products with the help of the embroiderers for especially niche clientele, it could be Indian, it could be Western, it could be anybody for that matter, because I am in that field, so I can share these things. A lot of time, people in the West look at us here in India to do all the uh, handwork in terms of embroidery, in terms of applique, um, hand weaving, many things. So for me, that is a way of inclusivity also, because when you include a larger public to work for you, they are paid their wages, decent wages. So that is one way of looking at it. And similar with the high-end market in India, and crafts are really respected there if done in a very neat way with good quality, so that's really appreciated, handcrafted products. Then the other way to look at it is to create fashion, clothing, whatever, or fashioning garments and things for a larger mass, which has been ignored for a very long time, because everything that is produced is largely produced for either exports in India or for an elite, or for a an elite kind of a market. But when you look at people who need products, 70% of the India still lives in villages, it's still rural, but they have needs, they have wants. So understanding that and creating products for their use, uh, even in terms of clothing and fashion, which is happening now. Now we have, for the past, I think, 10 years or so, I see a lot of change. People have started thinking uh, in terms of including everyone. So there's a huge amount of focus on inclusivity, whether it's gender or it's social strata or it's people with special needs. So everybody is now really sort of thought about. And a term which I've sort of heard being coined recently, say about 3-4 years ago, at least that's when I heard it, universal design. So when people are talking about universal design, when people are talking about inclusivity, I think we are stepping into a world where everybody appreciates each other. Everybody appreciates cultural differences or multiculturalism, whichever way you'd like to put it. So there is multiculturalism and everybody appreciates those differences. And there is scope for inclusivity. And I think now that people have started thinking in those terms, you do not have designers which are only designing for the elite segment. You have designers for every segment. In fact, it's very heartening to note that the artisans or karigars, who are working on embroidery or weaving, can now invite designers to guide them what to make for their own market. So I think things are changing in India. It's a very interesting time right now. Um, so yeah, I think people are beginning to understand that, and inclusivity is spreading. uh, and for your first question, inclusivity in sort of exclusivity is that you include people to create products. It's not that they are not a part of that creation. And I think again, India is really huge and has a very long history, and throughout that history you see that people have felt included when together they have created products for somebody, even if it's a very special product. So yeah, that is how I'd like to answer it. I hope it makes sense to
Yes,
you.
ma'am. Thank you for this interesting
Thank you.
answer. And my next question is for Dr. Parul. And my question to you,
Dr. Bhatnagar, you must have be having something very special with me in some past birth. So I'm back
I
again
think so.
for your question. So, Dr. Bhatnagar, let me just figure out the question that Shruti has designed for you and ask you after. I apologize for the trouble that we are causing. Uh, so, Dr. Bhatnagar, costumes and textiles have occupied a prominent place in the world across geographic regions and climatic conditions since ancient times. Based on your book, do you think textile and costume designing has been influenced by the foreign sources and evolved into the same in Indian fashion? Uh, Question for
Thank
you,
you.
Professor Bhatnagar.
Thank you, ma'am. Evolution of costumes and textiles began the day Eve strategically covered herself with the first stick. But her garments did not have a lasting quality, and she probably changed them as often as her moods. We can see from the ancient paintings and sculptures that the Indian women was as fashion conscious as their European counterparts. Textiles have been produced in India since antiquity. However, very few of the old textiles still exist. One reason that cloth has long been regarded solely as an article of consumption rather than an art form. The designs are lost through everyday wear and tear. The Indian villages of now bears little resemblance to its predecessors of about 4,000 years ago. Yet, the bulk of early styles of costumes, such as embroidered, painted, dyed, printed, etc., may be described as genuine traditional art in the original sense of the term. As time went on, however, the cultural isolation of most of the villages decreased in proportion of their growing contacts with their neighboring towns, and consequently with the culture of the great temple complexes and the royal courts, which represented them with the prevailing phases of Indian high art, particularly the village culture or the traditional life remained untouched as cultural exchange and reciprocal influence took place. Another factor which played an equally important role in the development of traditional Indian textiles and costumes for the foreigners over the several thousand years is the country's geography. In the cultural and historical sense, Indian constitutes a vast subcontinent of strongly contrasting physical features and corresponding variations in the climate. In the north, the weather was cold. The textiles produced were generally embroidered, or if they were woven, small handlooms were used. As the work had to be carried out indoors, the raw material used to be wool, which was freely available. In the south, the hot and humid temperature was very good for black soil cultivation. Thus, the best quality of cottons could be seen there. The Deccan Plateau, with its vast forest having mulberry cultivations, produced silk in abundance. In the west, having mixed climate, the best quality printing amongst was done, although embroidery and woven work was also done. In the east, the cotton, silk, and woolen materials were embroidered. You all must be aware of the fact that the beautiful paisley motif, was also known as the ambi or the amblikar, had been produced in abundance when it went to Scotland. 200 kilometers from Scotland, there is a place a village by the name of Paisley, and it got mechanized through the technology there. Instead of the hand design, embroidery, etc., it was done commercially on not on looms but on machines. So when we look into the designs, when we talk about the various styles, the costumes, well, my dear friend Angela is sitting there. No nothing against you, Angela, but the fact is that in India, we are very, very rich in culture. We are very, very rich in our costumes, in our designs. But what is really lacking in our country is, it's sad, but that is what is happening. Our population is too much. And there is a lot of poverty. That is the reason that today, when we look into the foreigners, when we look into their designs, we are trying to copy it. Although they are not doing anything rocket science, they're not doing. They are only what Toolika also just said about how they are taking it, is that these people are copying the foreigners and they feel they are the best. But actually, what are the foreigners are doing? If you look into, I can name a innumerable number of things. They are coming to India. They're coming to, she comes from Rajasthan, she'll vouch for that. All these foreigners are there in Gujarat. They all are here. They copy the things, they take it there. Maiva prints, everybody's aware of. Yeah, okay, let me not, at this, I should not name anyone, but they are just purely copying it. If we and you people work together, we can do wonders. You know what is going to happen? Instead of exploiting these poor artisans, and if you look into the books also today, there are hardly Indian authors. How do foreign authors really know so much about India? It's not that. It is just that we have to work together. The foreign people know how to have these copyrights. They know how to have these intellectual property rights or things like that, and they take it away. Whereas when we are talking about the costumes, we are talking about the designs, we are being, what I say, I should not talk about it, that we are being exploited. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your answer. And my next question is for Dr. Jansen. And my question is to you. Traditional clothing is not simply functional or ornamental, but is infused with meaning and is part of the identity of the indigenous communities that use it. Unfortunately, designers sometimes take traditional culture expressions and reuse them out of the context in ways that disregard or misinterpret their cultural significance and thereby cause a great harm to the holders of these expressions. What is your opinion on that? You, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, Shruti, for your question. I find it a very difficult question, in all honesty, because from my positionality, if I would answer that question, how would I differ from Nike appropriating patterns and putting them on their sneakers? I cannot speak for, in this case, the Guna people. I will never, ever be able to know how violent, hurtful, disrespectful this act is and continues to be for them. And I think it's exactly the same what Dr. Bhatnagar is saying. European fashion is constructed on centuries of appropriating cultural heritage that doesn't belong to them and commercializing it under a capitalist system to drive an industry, what we call today rich countries. How have we become rich? It's not, as you say, Dr. Bhatnagar, because we're so smart. It's because we didn't have, how do you say that, the scrutiny to exploit. The capitalist system, and maybe that comes back to the question that was asked to Dr. Gupta, exclusivity and inclusiveness don't go together. But fashion, or fashioning the body, initially is not a capitalist system. Fashioning the body is a human need to fashion the body. But when it was turned into a system, when it was turned into a capitalist system based on exclusivity, based on exclusion of different social classes or ethnicities or races, you name it, but the way the dominant fashion system only can work is based on exclusion. So it's, for me personally, a contradiction to talk about inclusiveness when we're talking about the dominant capitalist system. What we have completely lost is why we fashion our bodies. If we could go back to that and eliminate the entire capitalist industrial fashion system, then we would solve already an incredible amount of the problems that the dominant fashion system is facing today. But I'm going to try and stick to the question that you just asked me, is about cultural appropriation. So one of the claims that Europe is making in justifying its superiority is being people of history. While being the people who actually don't have their history, we have no idea who our ancestors were. We have no idea what actually our so-called traditional dress was. Because we were so busy appropriating heritage of others. And why? Because there's a political system behind it, because we had to be superior, or at least justify our superiority by appropriating. We have completely lost our own roots or cultural roots, or in this case, traditional dress. I mean, there are little pockets in places, in rural places, in certain European countries where there is still something of a traditional dress, but it's dead in the sense of it's completely disconnected from its locality and its history and its storytelling, because it has become costume, it has become a folklore. But so how can I answer your question of cultural appropriation? I think, again, we need another hour of talking. But so it isn't rocket science. It is exploitation. It is incredibly violent. And it needs to stop at some point. At some point, rather yesterday than tomorrow. But so we do need collectives, hopefully, as the one I'm part of, is what we call speaking back, or disrupting. So whenever we get the opportunity, that's what we need to speak out from. I just recently, like an hour ago, read another sentence by an incredibly smart woman called Sandra Neeson. Modernity is about forgetting. Modernity is about amnesia. Not only have we lost our roots, have forgotten our roots, have we forgotten who our ancestors are, but we've also forgotten how incredibly exploitive and brutal modernity is. So it's all about remembering, and it's all about connecting again. For us, it's connecting back to our roots, but it's also connecting to all these communities around the world that have been violated and suffering from this system, including the dominant fashion system. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And with this, we now come to the end of our today's session. I would once again like to say that we're calling for submissions of stories, essays, and poems. And for project architecture and submission guidelines, please visit our website www.tellmeyourstory.biz. I extend a heartfelt thank you to Dr. Toolika Gupta, Dr. Parul Bhatnagar, and Dr. Angela Jansen for this wonderful and remarkable session. Thank you so much for joining us, ma'am.